Young Frankenstein wasn't just a comedy, it was a resurrection. It dragged gothic horror and screwball parody back from the grave. Black and white, lightning bolts, hoarse screams and all. But behind the scenes, nothing came easy. The studio hated the format. The title was nearly scrapped, and one scene pushed the ratings board so far they almost slapped it with an R. These are 20 weird facts about Young Frankenstein. And buried inside the madness? A pair of giant platform boots that Mel Brooks wore to dinner. Just to make a point, stand clear, the sparks are about to fly. The studio fought the monster and lost. Sometimes staying true to your vision means scaring the suits more than the audience. Young Frankenstein wasn't just a comedy. Mel Brooks wanted it to feel like a true universal monster film, complete with moody lighting, fog, and yes, black and white film. The studio freaked out. In the 1970s, black and white was box office poison. They offered Brooks more money, color previews, and bigger promo budgets if he'd just modernize. Brooks didn't budge. He told them flat out, if it's not black and white, he's out. They finally caved, but with a weird condition. They wouldn't let him advertise that it was black and white. Brooks agreed anyway. The film turned out to be a visual time machine, a perfect parody that looked exactly like the thing it was spoofing. By refusing to compromise, Mel Brooks made a film that didn't just mock the past, it honored it. The script was just a suggestion. Sometimes the best comedy happens when no one sticks to the plan. On the set of Young Frankenstein, director Mel Brooks demanded precision, but Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman had other ideas. Between takes, they'd huddle, whispering tweaks and flipping punchlines. Brooks kept shouting, "Stick to the script," and they kept smiling, then ignoring him. Feldman even rewrote his own entrance, debuting a completely new accent on camera without warning anyone. The crew cracked up. Brooks was furious, until he watched the footage. What he saw wasn't just funny, it was electric, unpredictable, alive. From that moment on, Brooks loosened the reins, not because he liked the chaos, but because he realized that breaking the rules was where the magic lived. The moving hump. Nobody mentioned. Sometimes the best jokes are the ones no one points out. In Young Frankenstein, Igor's iconic hump mysteriously jumps from one shoulder to the other, then disappears entirely. Was it a continuity error? Nope. It was Marty Feldman being Marty Feldman. Without telling anyone, he started shifting the hump from scene to scene, just to mess with the cast and crew. When Mel Brooks finally caught on, he didn't fix it. He laughed and told the editors, "Leave it." It became a hidden gem, never acknowledged in the film, just another layer of surreal brilliance. She wasn't trying to be funny. That's why it worked. Sometimes comedy doesn't come from punchlines, but from pure, unsettling presence. In Young Frankenstein, Cloris Leachman played Frau Blucher with a cold, clipped intensity that felt more horror than parody. She invented a strange, untraceable accent, delivered absurd lines with eerie precision, and never winked at the joke. It wrecked the set. Gene Wilder cracked mid-line. Terry Garr had to turn away. Even the camera crew couldn't hold it together. Mel Brooks didn't ask her to tone it down. Instead, he let her roll. They cut around the cast's laughter and built the scene on whatever footage survived. The result? A hypnotic, bone-dry character who never chased the laugh, but stole every one. An Oscar winner walks into a parody. Even the most serious actors sometimes just want to have fun. Gene Hackman, known for intense dramas and heavyweight roles, bumped into Gene Wilder on a tennis court and confessed, "I want to do something funny, just once." Wilder had the perfect pitch, and in Young Frankenstein, Hackman appeared as the blind hermit who offers soup, wine, and cigars to the monster. Hackman filmed it all in a single day. He accidentally set Peter Boyle's crotch on fire, smashed props, and delivered every line with heartfelt sincerity. It wasn't just a gag, It was one of the most bizarre and brilliant cameos in comedy history. Unexpected, deadpan, and unforgettable. Oh, my friend, sometimes in our worldly matters. The lab wasn't a set, it was a time machine. Sometimes the best way to spoof something is to treat it with total seriousness. While prepping the lab scenes for Young Frankenstein, Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks didn't want a goofy replica. They wanted authenticity. They wanted it to feel like the real 1930s. So they found Kenneth Strickfaden, the original designer behind the 1931 Frankenstein lab. Miraculously, he still had all the gear: Tesla coils, arcing electrodes, vintage switchboards, gathering dust in his garage, and every piece still worked. He shipped it to the set, where it slotted in perfectly, like it had been waiting all those years. It didn't just elevate the scene, it gave the movie an eerie pulse of history. That wasn't parody, that was resurrection. The horses knew something you didn't. Sometimes the weirdest jokes are rooted in something real. In Young Frankenstein, every time someone says "Frau Blücher," the horses scream in terror. It's absurd, it's hilarious, and it's not random. Mel Brooks later confessed the gag was inspired by a real woman from his childhood. Someone cold, severe, unforgettable. To him, the name itself carried fear. So in the film, the horses react like survivors of past trauma. It became one of the most surreal running jokes in comedy history. But under the laughter was a sliver of something darker. A punchline built on a memory that never quite healed. The joke that may have birthed a rock anthem. Sometimes a simple gag walks farther than anyone expects. In Young Frankenstein, Igor hands Dr. Frankenstein a cane and says, "Walk this way." What follows is a perfectly synced limp as they hobble off screen together. Audiences cracked up. It was quick, dumb, and perfect. But then came the twist. Years later, rumors spread that Aerosmith's song "Walk This Way" was inspired by that very scene. The band never confirmed it, but the timeline lines up a little too well. Whether it's true or not, that moment, just a few seconds of physical comedy, left a cultural footprint no one saw coming. A goofy limp that might have swaggered straight into rock history. The black and white flop that crushed the box office. Every so often, Hollywood gets it completely wrong. Young Frankenstein looked like a financial disaster on paper. Black and white, weird pacing, no big marketing push. In 1974, it was the anti-blockbuster. The studio barely backed it, dumping it quietly into theaters without fanfare. But audiences had other plans. Word of mouth turned it from a curiosity into a phenomenon. It raked in over $80 million on a budget of under $3 million, beating out glossier, louder films that year. No one expected it to work, especially not the people funding it. But the fans did. They showed up again and again. The movie didn't follow the rules, and that's exactly why it won. Are you saying that I put an abnormal brain into a 7.5-foot-long, 54-inch-wide gorilla? The monster comedy that crashed the Oscars. Even chaos, when done right, can earn a standing ovation. Young Frankenstein wasn't just a box office triumph. It cracked the Academy's cold outer shell, earning nominations for Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Sound. A black and white horror parody, filled with lightning, groans, and horse screams, was suddenly rubbing shoulders with Hollywood's most polished productions. It didn't win. The Towering Inferno took both awards. But Gene Wilder didn't care. Just getting recognized meant something. For a film that broke all the rules, being taken seriously was the real prize. It wasn't the trophies that made it immortal. It was the fans who kept laughing. No matter what you hear in there, no matter how cruelly I beg you, do not open this door. Let me out. Get me the hell out of here. Mommy. The scene that nearly got the axe. Sometimes the weirdest ideas are the ones that stick. In Young Frankenstein, the now iconic "Puttin' on the Ritz" number almost didn't make it to camera. Mel Brooks thought it was too strange, too long, and way too Broadway for a monster movie spoof. He begged Gene Wilder to cut it. Wilder refused. He saw something in the absurdity. So they shot it. Full tuxedos, spotlight, and all. And when Brooks finally saw it on screen, he didn't just change his mind, he called it the best scene in the movie. A moment that started as a battle became one of the most unforgettable gags in comedy history. Puttin' on the Ritz! The monster was melting terror on screen. Peter Boyle looked like the perfect monster in Young Frankenstein, but becoming him was a nightmare. Each day began with hours in the makeup chair. Latex, prosthetics, glue, layer after suffocating layer. Under the hot studio lights, it all started to melt, literally. His scars slid off, his forehead bubbled, his monster face sagged like wax. The crew scrambled to fan him down and rebuild the look, again and again, but Boyle never lost it. He powered through, sweat-drenched and silent, even dancing in full tuxedo when the scene demanded it. He didn't just survive the makeup, he made it iconic. This is a good boy. Do we love him? The last-minute casting that changed everything. Sometimes the perfect choice shows up when no one's looking. Young Frankenstein had its Ininga, or so the studio thought. A more elegant actress had already been chosen, someone dramatic with classical training. But behind the scenes, things fell apart. Creative clashes opened the role back up, with cameras already prepping. No audition, no spotlight, just a quiet tip from Gene Wilder. That's how Terry Garr walked in. She didn't try to be funny, she just was. Warm, sincere, slightly absurd. She played the role like she'd always been part of the joke. Mel Brooks watched her read, then he smiled. Whatever plans the studio had before, they were gone. Garr was Ininga now, and no one ever questioned it again. The director who vanished on purpose. Sometimes the best magic trick is staying off stage. Mel Brooks loved cameos. In Blazing Saddles and Spaceballs, he played multiple characters himself. But for Young Frankenstein, Gene Wilder laid down a rule. No Mel. Not in costume, not even in the background. This one had to feel real. No winks, no modern breaks. Brooks agreed. He stayed behind the camera, but not completely. His voice became a howling wolf, a screeching cat, a distant train whistle. He vanished visually, but his presence still echoed through the shadows. The audience never saw him, but they always heard him. That was the trick. Hide the magician, let the spell work. A thunderstorm. So real, it flooded the set. No CGI, no sound libraries. If Young Frankenstein needed a storm, they built one from scratch. Pipes for rain, rigs for lightning, fans for wind, and a lighting board that looked like it could launch a spaceship. And then they turned it all on. It worked, a little too well. Water pressure blew the system, lights shorted, and the lab set started to flood. Ankle-deep chaos in a room full of high-voltage equipment. For a second, they thought they'd have to shut down for days. Instead, the crew pulled an all-nighter, dried it out, fixed the gear, and by morning the lab looked perfect again. What you see in the film? That's not just a storm. That's barely contained disaster, in perfect lighting. The title fight. To Gene Wilder, Young Frankenstein was perfect. It had irony, legacy, weirdness, the whole package. The studio hated it. Too slow, too confusing, too bookish. At one point, executives pitched alternatives like Frankenstein Returns or Son of Frankenstein. The comedy, names that sounded like rejected cereal mascots. Mel Brooks refused. Wilder, usually the calm one, snapped. If they change the title, he told Mel, I'm out. It wasn't a tantrum, it was a line in the sand. The studio backed down. The title stayed. And Young Frankenstein marched into history, exactly as weird and wonderful as it sounded. The last day on set. By the time Young Frankenstein wrapped, no one wanted it to end. Months of rehearsals, rewrites, and laughing through takes had brought the cast closer than anyone expected. A parody about resurrection had somehow breathed life into everyone who touched it. So, on the final day, someone made a suggestion. If they had to say goodbye, why not do it right? The crew gathered, lit candles, draped a cloth like a shroud, and held a mock funeral for the film. They spoke in accents, read eulogies, mourned the characters they'd brought to life. It was absurd, it was heartfelt, it was perfectly Young Frankenstein. A goodbye, not just to a movie, but to one of the happiest, strangest chapters of their lives. Bonus fact: the monster's boots were custom-made, massive and heavy enough to throw off Peter Boyle's balance during filming. After the shoot, Mel Brooks took them home, not as a souvenir, but as a statement. He wore them to dinner parties, stomped through Hollywood cocktail events, and when asked why, he'd grin and say, "They make me feel taller and funnier." Those boots didn't just belong to the monster, they belonged to the man who built the monster's world, and he never stopped walking in them. Young Frankenstein wasn't made to be timeless. It was made from instinct, memory, and love. It didn't follow trends, it followed feeling. And somehow, in all its black and white weirdness, it became something lasting. If this one still makes you laugh, or think, or wonder how they pulled it off, go ahead and like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. What moment from Young Frankenstein still sticks with you? Thanks for watching, and remember, it's pronounced Frankenstein.